Just look at me and smile. You're used to this, aren't you? I joined the Royal Masonic School in 1961 and taught there for effectively 11 years. 11 years went, frankly, in a flash, but looking back on it, I don't remember a great deal of it, which is embarrassing, but there are people who stand out, there are events that stand out. I think initially my first memory was meeting Mr. Bevan, the deputy head, who asked me to comment about what sort of sports I'd like playing. I said, oh, basketball, football. He looked at me as though he'd never heard of basketball, and he also said straight away, well, we don't play football here, it's a rugby school. Cricket, hockey and rugby. And you will probably have gathered it doesn't take long to pick up rugby if you like sport, and I was always a sport fanatic. And obviously, once I was in the school, I did actually start to generate interest in basketball, and mostly between inter-house players, though we did play occasionally against other schools. But the sport was never really encouraged in the sense that, not being one of the three main sports, our attempts to play other schools was accepted graciously, but not encouraged. But there were one or two people who stood out in the basketball field. There was a young man called Sanderson, who I think went on to study ancient history and Greek and Latin, I think at Oxford, and I'm told that he might actually have stayed there to carry on teaching. Very talented player. And another tall lad called Graham Mees, who was going to be a doctor, and I have no idea if he succeeded, but he probably will be a doctor by now. Probably begin to retire, I'm not quite sure. But one or two names sort of spring to mind. Because I was in Devonshire House, my then housemaster, when I first joined, was Mr. K. I'm sorry, I've got that wrong.
That's okay.
It was Pike, yeah. And Pike himself did not last long at school for reasons I never quite understood, but I believe he died of a heart attack. In fact, I'd been out for the evening and drove in about 10 o'clock at night to find him stretched out in the gravel behind Devonshire, between Devonshire and Derby House. But the first person who made a real impact on me was Ken Littledyke. Because I joined the art and craft department, Ken Littledyke obviously ran everything his own way. A very talented man, very good at woodwork particularly, and of course his forte was the canoes, and the number of timber canoes that were built by various students. I wouldn't like to think how many they were, but it was a real joy to join a department where the member of staff who led it was so in control of what he wanted to do that everything sort of worked like clockwork. Woodwork being his forte, in the course of the years I was there, things began to change, and we had a huge investment in a new workshop for metalwork. And at the same time we had further premises built which were included in a room for plastics. And we had a gentleman called Jeff Wynne, I think it was, who joined us looking after the plastics. And Ken more or less pushed me into the metalwork side and said, all right, Jeff, you look after this, I'll do the wood, you do the metal, Mr. Wynne does the plastic, and that's our team. And it was very, very successful, I think. Not trying to brag about it, but it was a wonderful facility set up. The Masonic must have poured a huge amount of money into it. And the pupils, I think, found this was a relaxation as well as an education, being something a little bit different from, you know, English, history, maths and Latin, etc. Obviously, I moved on in 1972, but in the interim period of 11 years, I think I threw myself into the life of the school, primarily because I was always completely hooked on sports. Having come from Loughborough, anything sporting was something I would like to do, even if it was a new sport such as the rugby. Quite clearly remembering Mr. Hudson encouraging me to take part in the school rugby side. We used to play a game against the boys. This used to be called a friendly. Interesting experience, put it like that. But I lived through it, and being young, fit and fairly fast, thoroughly enjoyed it. But the boys would have a go at you if they possibly could, possibly taking out on you an act of revenge in some cases. But it was a great fun thing, really good. And I think that summed up the school as far as I was concerned. It was a place where I felt that the pupils who came to us had obviously suffered a considerable loss, probably came to us feeling a little lost in the world, and the school stepped in and took over the paternal role, as it were. And because the school was all engrossing, everything was encapsulated within the site, pupils hardly ever went out apart from weekend passes, it became the new family. And I think one of the nicest things about the Masonic school that I remember is that it did feel like a family. From top to bottom, you felt you were part of a wide group, all basically working towards making the life of these particular pupils comfortable within reason and providing them with an excellent education. I think there are people who will probably suggest that I'm being a little bit wearing rose-coloured glasses, because I suspect that some of the youngsters when they arrived must have found it an enormous strain to be away in a boarding school. But as they progressed through the school, undoubtedly they began to take more command of themselves. They grew up, they became prefects, performed roles within the school, and I rather imagine they also probably felt that they were part and parcel of a very worthwhile educational exercise. Right, let's think of a few things we can talk about. Quite quickly into the school, I was drafted into Ken Littledyke's canoeing club. It seemed like fun. He taught me to paddle a canoe, even in the small confines of the pool. And then he said, look, if we're going to do canoeing, Jeff, you really ought to get your BCU certificate. BCU, right, okay. Where will we do this? Rickmansworth Reservoir. All right, we trotted down there in the car with a canoe on top, and he said, all right, Jeff, in you go, paddle around. And he taught me to fall out and rescue the boat, and I thought, God, I've never been so cold in my life on Rickmansworth Reservoir. Duly survived that, and of course the next thing I knew, we were doing Duke of Edinburgh's Award with the canoeing activity. So Ken and I then ran the canoeing, as other members of staff did the rock climbing and the orienteering. And that's another great experience, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award scheme. I don't know how long the school had been doing that. I think it was probably starting more or less as I joined the place. I may be wrong. But to take senior pupils down for, I think it was the Silver Award we did, Silver or Gold Award. They were trained up partly through the Army Corps at school. A lot of the funds for the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme, I think, were funded by the Army Corps. We had their facilities, we had their transport, and a group of people taking the Silver Award, taken down to places like Cornwall or up in the Yorkshire Moors, and more or less turned loose on the moors to do a 2 or 3 day hike, and of course had to be supervised, but supervised from a distance. So periodically we would actually track where they were, check on they were okay, in the evening check they'd made camp. Great experience as far as I'm concerned. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure the pupils did as well. And it was amazing how pupils changed on Duke of Edinburgh Award schemes. People who were quite timid got involved and suddenly found themselves sort of becoming men almost, leading the group, trying to encourage those who've got blisters in their boots, and obviously taking charge of setting up camp in the morning and evenings. Great experience, and many of our pupils, they actually go on and do the Gold Award, and whilst I never went down to one, I know Ken Littledyke went to the Palace as part of the celebrations and award ceremonies on a couple of occasions. Right, am I talking too much?
That's very good. It's very concise, because sure, pieces are the most interesting bits that can be taken on their own.
You can slot them in and juggle with them.
Them all in. That's very good. Yeah.
I don't know whether it's fair to reminisce about my experiences at school.
Please do. Yeah.
Quite clearly, as a single man, I found the restrictions of being a house tutor a little onerous. But fortunately, my housemaster, after my original master died, I think was Mr. Croft.
Yes.
And he was a bachelor and didn't seem to have many activities outside school time. So quite regularly he would say to me, you know, it may be your weekend on duty in school, but I'm not going anywhere, so you can have a weekend out, which enabled me to do what most men of my age, at about 25, was socialise. And I know on one occasion Mr. Haig and his wife invited me to go down to Wall Hall to meet some of the lady teachers in Wall Hall, because it was a girls' educational establishment. I'm not sure if it was a school then, or in fact it was teacher training at that stage. But certainly I was introduced to some of the ladies down there. But in fact decided to plough my own furrow and obviously went my own way as to meet ladies. And subsequently met my wife when she was actually at Wall Hall as a trainee teacher. I think going back to the life of the school, even as a member of staff, you were so totally engrossed in what was going on. I know you did have the odd night out, the odd weekend off somewhere. Essentially, you were there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and consequently, your whole life revolved around it, as much as the pupils. And though you had outside interests, they tended to fade into the background more or less, and you made your life within the system itself. All right, now, quite clearly, I was anxious to do other things, but whatever happened, whatever activities you did, you came back to school, and the school basically felt like home. And for the 11 years I was there, I couldn't argue about the place. It was home to me in a way, and it became like a huge family. And I look back on it now, because to my shame I haven't thought much about it over the years until Peter introduced me to this discussion. But I would nip down to see my parents, who lived in Sussex, once or twice a term, and they would often say to me, "Why don't you come back and see us more often?" And I, to my shame perhaps, said, "Well, I've got a job to do, and that job is all engrossing." And I think that was the case for pretty well all the staff that I encountered at Masonic. They lived and breathed for what they were doing at the school. And it sounds rather, how can I put it? Can't find the right word for it, but it sounds as though they're obsessed with it. But in fact, I think they just felt the place was important. The lives of the pupils they were teaching were important, and the whole thing worked like clockwork for the benefit of the pupils. Now, obviously, the things went wrong on occasions, and one of the interesting things about that is you live in a boarding school when you have pupils there 24/7. And if something went seriously wrong, much to my shame, looking back on it, corporal punishment still existed. For the first 2 or 3 years at least that I was there, and I can quite clearly remember administering the cane to 1 or 2 miscreants and look back on that with some shame. But at the time, that was the way discipline was induced. Quite frankly, it was, I think, phased out after I'd been there about 3 years, which is just as well, I think, because pupils used to end up with some pretty wicked wheels on their backsides on occasions. But then discipline was maintained in other ways. I can quite clearly remember turfing out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. A little group of pupils who had done something, I don't remember what it was now, and took them off on a run. 5 o'clock in the morning, that was a punishment. I could run at that time, I can't now, but you know, pushing them at 5 o'clock in the morning to do a cross-country run was a good punishment and didn't do them any harm. But that sort of discipline was effective, I think, without hurting their feelings too much, and it made life at the school pretty smooth. There was very little need, as far as I was concerned, to actually discipline pupils. They seemed to accept what was going on, and very few pupils, I think, stepped out of line, the odd mistake here and there, but nothing that couldn't be dealt with very easily. And that was one of the beauties of being 24/7 in a school of that sort. Right, my favourite sport, basketball. Must mention that one. I know I'm a bit obsessed about it, but when I joined from Loughborough, I was already playing for the combined university side and wanted to introduce it in school, and was fortunate to get backboards and rings fitted in the gymnasium. Started off with a few pupils from Devonshire House. Gradually found I got a little nucleus of players who were enjoying the experience, who probably never played basketball before, and it slowly crept through to other houses, and of course then you start to pull in pupils from the other houses to form a team, a school team, and this became a sort of full-time hobby almost. It's not fair really to talk about me playing too much, but I obviously was no longer playing for the university side, but I was playing for a team in Watford and another team in St Albans. So I kept my own skills level up, and the pupils themselves were quickly to pick up skills, and we started playing games against schools, and in particular the American school was on the site down the other side of the Aldenham Road. Now of course, being an American school, they could play basketball. I think they play it at birth, I should think. But it was experience for our pupils to see pupils who had been growing up with basketball and to see the difference. And it was also amazing how quickly our pupils picked up some of the skills that they were encountering, and clearly bring that back to school, and the school standard gradually went up. And we were really pretty well unbeatable between the local schools, and we tried to have team games outside. And as I mentioned to you earlier on, this lad Sanderson turned out to be an absolute natural. He was only about 5'10", but he had an amazing spring on him. He could actually dunk. One of the few pupils I ever actually saw dunk a ball. And another one, Graham Mees, who I mentioned, who I think went on to be a doctor. He was a big lad. And we used to take him down the gym to build up his muscles in the evenings after prep. And he turned out to be an extremely good pivot and was really the leader of the basketball pack. Now I digress a little bit there, because the whole school day was a whole school day. I mean, all the time, from beginning to end of the day, there was something going on the pupils were involved in. And right up to the end of the school day, when you had a prep session, or homework session I suppose you would have called it, before bedtime, and at the end of that point, obviously the younger members of the pupils turned in, and I used to take off down the gym with some of the sixth formers, and we would then either play basketball together or use the weights. Anything as far as I was concerned to maintain my physical ability and also to encourage them. And it became a wonderful way of letting off steam in the evening. Some of them developed really good talents for sports, and I think partly because there was so much opportunity to do private practice, not just out on the playing field on the afternoon game sessions. I'm right in thinking, of course, games was every afternoon. I'm a little bit vague on this, but I'm pretty sure we taught in the mornings, and I think we then had games in the afternoon, and then at the end of the afternoon we went back into school, and it was finished off in houses as the homework sessions. Homework,
that's right.
One way of putting it. Right, I have actually still got the Masonic, July 72, which was sent to me after I left school. And I hadn't realised at the time there was an interesting chunk from Mr. Mullins. And one of the things that I picked out when I read his review of my life at the school was, and perhaps I wasn't aware of this myself, but he said, my enthusiasm for things helped make my teaching interesting and help pupils to actually get involved. And looking back at it, I've always been obsessive about sport, very enthusiastic about it, and of course pretty well everything else you do, your teaching, woodwork, your metalwork, your plastic, all that knowledge becomes something you enjoy imparting, and because you enjoy imparting it, I hate to say it, I think it makes you a more effective teacher. And one or two of the interesting comments Peter came back with to show me this evening does reflect quite kindly on my enthusiasm for all things sporting and also for all things to do with the teaching. Reflecting on the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, we had a parental control and a regard for the safety of these senior pupils on the silver and gold awards, but they of course undertook to trek across the moors from various points, and we would check them as they went from one point to another to make sure they actually arrived safely. And we'd actually check them out in the evening to make sure they made camp and they were having a brew up and getting their food organised, because all this was totally done by them. We weren't going to wet nurse them. They had the food supplies, they had to cook it. And some of them actually really became very good at leading their group. And one of the interesting things about it, which I was perhaps slightly hesitant to tell you, is in the evening when the camps had been set, food was being cooked, we could go away and leave them till the following morning. And we would quite often repair, particularly in Cornwall when we were down there, repair to a local pub, drink 1 or 2 pints, possibly too many, and join in with what is a Cornish tradition, which is singing hymns. and to this day I can remember, I don't know where it started from, you were in a pub, you were having a drink, and someone would start to sing a hymn, and the whole pub would join in, male voice chorus. Now I can't pretend I've ever had a good singing voice, but it was a very interesting experience and sort of, I don't know, somehow helped wrap you into a sort of a new environment you weren't familiar with. And we became very close to the locals when we were down there because of our willingness to join in and sing hymns with them, as well as drink their pints. I may not get cut out that one, I don't know.
What we'll do, what doesn't get used will all be stored and archived.
Oh God, yes, okay. I don't think there's any point in me rattling on about the changes of staff particularly. I mean, I know, I don't know what happened to Croft.
He went abroad, as I remember. We had a collection when the boys bought him a typewriter we presented him with when he left.
Oh, right.
A portable typewriter, which he was very pleased.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is fine. I mean, I don't want this on camera really, but I suspect when you look back at your own, my teaching at that stage, I was full of myself. You know, probably over the top. And, you know, everything you did was important and you drove yourself and you drove other people with it. And that was one of the interesting things about the pupils, because you had them in there, in your control, you could push them to do things well. And it did.
No, you were young, you were enthusiastic, and that was fine with me. And that was fine.
Does that ring a bell with you?
Definitely. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. I mean, you often used to say the word lads to us.
Yes.
So you were nicknamed Jeff Ladd.
I didn't know that one.
You were Jeff
I'm sure I was called a lot worse.
And Linda became Linda Ladd.
Linda Ladd. Yes, I have to admit that Lynn was a bit of a distraction.
Yeah.
But I didn't meet her until 65. So I've been at the school for 4 or 5 years then.
Yeah.
And she did appear on the school site on a number of occasions when we were courting, that's true.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because we married in 68, so that was, and that was of course when we were given the out of school house.
Yes.
And for which I feel very privileged.
Yes, yeah.
You can put that in by all means, because I mean I think I was one of the very few members of staff who ever offered an off-campus site with the view to continuing at school, but obviously not being housemaster or house tutor anymore.
No.
Yeah. No, it's very privileged.